Shortly before Europe was hit with the recent terror attack in Brussels, one prominent European leader was warning that the growing tsunami of Middle Eastern immigrants flooding into the West is actually an organized plot by internationalist extremists to destroy liberty, nationhood, Western civilization, and Christendom. Speaking last week at Hungary's National Museum in a historic speech that was largely ignored or distorted by the establishment press, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, called on Europeans to unite against the threat emanating from the European Union headquartered in Brussels. The question, he said, is whether Europeans will live as slaves or free men. And as such, it is time for the people of Europe's nations to summon the courage needed to confront Brussels' fanatical internationalism, or to be crushed by it, he added. Orban noted that freedom in Europe was already being crushed, and that globalist schemers in Brussels were plotting to destroy nation-states on the road toward an illegitimate United States of Europe. The so-called refugee crisis, he said, is a gigantic lie. Most of the arrivals are not actual refugees, and humanitarianism is not the agenda of the globalist conspirators. Instead, the engineered crisis is a tool of sinister forces plotting to destroy Western civilization while undermining Christianity and nation-states. He previously lambasted those responsible for creating and exploiting the immigration tidal wave as a treasonous conspiracy that is using the crisis to achieve what it failed to accomplish through political means. While vowing to offer protection for real refugees, Orban also warned that tens of millions of people in the Third World were preparing to start heading for Europe, largely for economic or religious reasons, and that action to stop the invasion was both crucial and urgent. Others, including open borders zealots, have also noted that the millions arriving so far might be just the beginning. Everything the West holds dear is facing mortal danger from this, Orban said. The real threat, though, is at EU headquarters in Brussels, he emphasized. And it must be dealt with. That begins with speaking the truth. In a speech that may go down in history as a crucial turning point, Orban told Hungarians, "Today Europe is as fragile, weak and sickly as a flower being eaten away by a hidden worm." He added, "Europe is not free. Because freedom begins with speaking the truth." Today, he explained, it is forbidden across much of Europe to speak the truth. It is forbidden to say that those arriving are not refugees, but that Europe is threatened by migration, he said. It is forbidden to say that tens of millions are ready to set out in our direction. It is forbidden to say that immigration brings crime and terror to our countries. It is forbidden to point out that the masses arriving from other civilizations endanger our way of life, our culture, our customs and our Christian traditions. It is also forbidden to point out that those immigrants who have already arrived are building up a separate world for themselves, with its own laws and ideals, that is tearing apart the 1,000-year-old structure of Europe, he continued. It is forbidden to point out that this is not an accidental and unintentional chain of consequences, but a pre-planned and orchestrated operation, a mass of people directed towards us, said Orban, whose popularity across Hungary and the EU has soared amid the crisis. It is forbidden to say that in Brussels they are concocting schemes to transport foreigners here as quickly as possible and to settle them here among us. It is also forbidden to speak about the real agenda behind what is happening, which Orban, displaying courage that is almost entirely absent today among Europe's ruling classes, has been boldly exposing. It is forbidden to point out that the purpose of settling people here is to reshape the religious and cultural landscape of Europe, and to re-engineer its ethnic foundations, thereby eliminating the last barrier to internationalism, the nation-states, he said, pointing out the fact that globalists are working to crush nationhood and national sovereignty on the road to what they often call their new world order. It is forbidden to say that Brussels is now stealthily devouring more and more slices of our national sovereignty, and that in Brussels many are now making a plan for a United States of Europe, for which no one has ever given authorization. Indeed, the New American has been reporting precisely that for many decades. In 1989, for example, in an article headlined United States of Europe, senior editor William Jasper noted that globalists were plotting to usurp ever more draconian powers to impose a superstate regime on the formerly sovereign peoples of Europe. Back then, the notion was still dismissed by the lying establishment and its propaganda organs as paranoia and a conspiracy theory. Now, EU bosses openly announce their intention to foist an all-powerful federal regime on Europeans, even after they have voted overwhelmingly and consistently to reject such scheming. Of course, as this magazine has also been reporting for decades, that has been the real agenda all along, with the eventual goal being a merger of regional regimes into a global government described by its apparatchiks such as globalists Henry Kissinger and billionaire George Soros as a new world order. The immigration tsunami is a tool of that agenda, as the New American explained in a recent cover story and many times before that. Already, globalists are exploiting the crisis they created to usurp more power at the regional and global level while waging more war on freedom and sovereignty. And it will only continue to accelerate unless and until the people of the West rise up and put a stop to it. The enemies of freedom, as Orban called the conspirators behind the refugee crisis, are cut from a different cloth than the royal and imperial rulers of old, or those who ran the Soviet system, he said, perhaps unaware that in many instances, they are in fact the very same individuals who managed to escape punishment for their crimes. They use a different set of tools to force us into submission, he continued, citing, among other strategies, the artillery bombardments, denunciations, threats and blackmail from the international media, which so far has been enough to keep most European leaders in line with the deadly agenda. But that is changing. The peoples of Europe are slowly awakening, they are regrouping, and will soon regain ground, Orban said. Europe's beams that rest on the suppression of truth are creaking and cracking. The peoples of Europe may have finally understood that their future is at stake. Now not only are their prosperity, cozy lives, jobs at stake, but our very security and the peaceful order of our lives are menaced as well. At last, the peoples of Europe, who have been slumbering in abundance and prosperity, have understood that the principles of life that Europe has been built on are in mortal danger. One important element in the battle will be understanding what Europe is and was, its history, its heritage, its traditions. Europe is the community of Christian, free, and independent nations, he explained, blasting the hordes of pseudo-human rights activists endeavoring to change that and attacking everyone who resists with false allegations of xenophobia and more. But with tens of millions of Muslims getting ready to head for Europe, all that Europe represents would be fundamentally transformed. Mass migration is a slow stream of water persistently eroding the shores. It is masquerading as a humanitarian cause, but its true nature is the occupation of territory. And what is gaining territory for them is losing territory for us. Orban was clear that those who come as new family members, allies, and genuine refugees are welcome in Hungary and should be welcome in Europe to make a new home for themselves. But those who have come here with the intention of changing our country, shaping our nation in their own image, those who have come with violence and against our will, have always been met with resistance, he explained, vowing not to import terrorism, crime, or anti-Semitism from abroad. He also blasted EU schemes to resettle immigrants across Europe against the will of nations and the people's elected representatives, saying that in Hungary, at least, it would not fly. The real danger, though, is not even the tsunami of Islamic immigrants, the overwhelming majority of whom are military-aged males. If we want to halt this mass migration, first we must curb Brussels, he said. The main danger to Europe's future does not come from those who want to come here, but from Brussels' fanatical internationalism. We should not allow Brussels to place itself above the law. We shall not allow it to force upon us the bitter fruit of its cosmopolitan immigration policy. He vowed that there would be no urban areas in Hungary beyond the reach of the law, so-called no-go zones. there will be no mass disorder or immigrant riots. And there shall be no gangs hunting down our women and daughters. As for the EU's extreme agenda to force nations to accept tens of thousands and then hundreds of thousands of Islamic immigrants, Hungary will refuse. We shall not allow others to tell us whom we can let into our home and country, whom we will live alongside, and with whom we will share our country, he said. We reject the forced resettlement scheme, and we shall tolerate neither blackmail, nor threats. The time has come to ring the warning bell. The time has come for opposition and resistance. The time has come to gather allies to us. The time has come to raise the flag of proud nations. The time has come to prevent the destruction of Europe, and to save the future of Europe. He called on every Hungarian and on every European, regardless of party, to unite. Evoking memories of Hungarian and Polish resistance to German and Soviet tyranny, Orban said Europeans knew how to resist oppression from afar, tyranny that would have swallowed up Hungary if it could have. Faceless globalists, he said, intend to eliminate everything that is unique, autonomous, age-old and national. They aim to blend cultures, religions and populations, until our many-faceted and proud Europe will finally become bloodless and docile. And if we resign ourselves to this outcome, our fate will be sealed, and we will be swallowed up in the enormous belly of the United States of Europe, he added. The task for Hungarians and other Europeans who have not yet lost all common sense, then, is to defeat, rewrite and transform the fate intended for us. Despite being increasingly demonized by EU bosses and their largely discredited propagandists in the press, Orban has been on a roll exposing many of the EU's lies. For example, under the guise of defending Europe's borders, Brussels is pushing a scheme to build up an EU military force that would have the power to intervene in European nations, even against their will. But when Orban's government tried to control the border, putting up a fence and placing troops along the borders with Serbia and Croatia, Eurocrats went ballistic, firing off a nasty and threatening letter warning Hungarian authorities to cut it out. In short, Orban's actions exposed the regime in Brussels as liars trying to deceive Europeans and usurp even more power. For the sake of Western civilization, Christendom, liberty, and the survival of independent nations, Europeans and Americans should consider Orban's warnings carefully, and resist the globalist agenda. The alternative, as Orban so eloquently put it,